Welcome to the Beat. I'm Ari Melber. And I'm with you tonight as President Trump makes his case for the first 100 days in a rally and a new TV interview. And he's facing another economic rebuttal, though, to the 100 days claims he's making about progress. In fact, there's tough new signals that growth is flagging in the U.S. Trump's big new interview wound up showing him admitting a point that his DOJ also tried to deny for legal reasons. Trump admitting he's refusing to pick up the phone and facilitate a detainee's return. And so he's not really following the Supreme Court order by his own admission. So we're going to get into both of these stories for you tonight. I want to begin with the sort of double-barreled problem the administration's facing as markets have slowing growth and mounting uncertainty.
The White House received its first GDP report card. The economy shrank 0.3% in the first quarter of 2025.
The U.S. economy shrinking for the first time in 3 years. The headline was that GDP in the first quarter contracted. First time we've seen a negative number since 2022.
The sharp reversal from the 2.4% growth we saw in the fourth quarter.
The economy is contracting. There's no doubt about it. Tariff turmoil sending GDP into the red. Stocks selling off a bit as the president's trade war now leading to big questions about where this economy is heading.
And the problems that Trump started in the markets are not just staying there. That news about a shrinking economy means a higher recession risk. Now, let's be clear and fair. Many factors, of course, can shape economic growth or retreat when you're talking about the entire U.S. economy or, as so much has been discussed lately, the entire global interaction of the economy. Those new numbers on the contracting overall gross domestic product, is that because of Trump's tariffs? Well, largely the answer is yes. The main driver of the first quarter contraction was Trump's trade war. That's from the Wall Street Journal, a kind of journalistic Bible for the financial class. And the point can be nuanced. Markets and growth often reflect plans for the future, expectations, right? Businesses will make moves. In this case, they have been bracing for the much advertised tariffs to take effect. So those new numbers were recorded before the Trump tariffs officially hit. Now the U.S. economy is at risk of repeating pandemic-era scenes, empty shelves, shortages of popular goods. That's from Axios. And it's what big box CEOs have warned about in a private meeting with President Trump. And it's not immediately reversible because the tariffs can bring what they call long disruptions in these supply chains. And then there are the toys. China makes many products that Americans buy. We know about prices going up, but some products like toys could become so hard to find at all that we're out of them for months, stretching all the way to Christmas. Retailers eyeing toy shortages, freezing holiday orders, predicting those shortages and higher prices. And that's the kind of setback that people will notice. Trump is already trying to get ahead of that potential holiday storyline, a kind of a Grinch problem. He suggests children maybe just can get by on fewer dolls.
Somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, and maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Okay, that's one response, but toys are just an indicator, something that everyone, even children, know about. But before these 100 days began of the second Trump term, he was arguing that the incumbent president should get credit or accountability for how the stock market does. He is now failing his own standard with the trillions wiped out, America's largest companies down about 8%. Facing that fall, Trump is ditching the former approach. And while the fall clearly came after he came into office, I showed you the chart from inauguration, with the markets responding to his tariffs, Trump now selling the claim that the fundamentals were some kind of mess that he inherited.
Since the election, the stock market is calling it I don't want to say this, it's too braggadocious, but we'll say it anyway, the Trump effect.
Now, the stock market's not doing so well, and you're saying that's the Biden stock market, yet you are the president. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm not taking a credit or discredit for the stock market. I'm just saying that we inherited a mess. When you look at the stock market in this case, it says how bad a situation we inherited.
That's the president's argument. He has every right to make it, but the markets aren't exactly buying it. Trump held this cabinet meeting today with MAGA merch and hats on the table. You can see him there. fellow internet marketer Elon Musk certainly knows a photo op. When the boss wants one, you can see him there donning two hats, one on top of the other with Gulf of America, while aides competed to praise Trump.
This is the 100th day of the most consequential, historic first 100 days in the history of this country.
Like this could be the greatest administration since the founding of the country.
Mr. President, I want to thank you for your vision, for your leadership, for giving me the 100 busiest days of my life. and most exciting.
Exciting. The cabinet touting, quote, exciting times. That's the president's sort of chosen message, obviously pretty coordinated and repeated today. But off stage, there's more scrutiny on Trump's blatant conflicts, abusing shadowy virtual currency networks, the Trump White House eviscerating the boundary between private enterprise and policy without precedent in history. The New York Times reports Trump pocketing more and more money from these crypto influencers and would-be donors. Hard to trace that money. Some of it's from overseas, it would appear. And that investigative reporting puts pressure on the Trump White House, just as reports about Musk's conflicts have, over time, impacted the administration and Musk's businesses, even how long he will be staying in Washington. I actually have more on that later this hour. The independent reporting also can bring up the kind of questions that the president and his PR tactics want to avoid and that he's struggling to answer. So here is the incriminating response I just mentioned a moment ago. We're going to hear it for yourself in the ABC interview where Trump says he could follow a court order but will not.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and
I
with
could.
all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now. But the court
But
has
he's
ordered
not.
you to facilitate that his
I'm
release.
not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't
president.
want to do this.
But the
Terry.
buck stops in his office.
No. I follow the law.
This could be a useful exchange for potential accountability. The president there, Trump, admitting that he's not following the order. Then in the exchange, as you heard, he kind of remembers at the court reference that the entire Trump DOJ strategy has been to pretend this is somehow muddled. You might recall when they had a bilateral meeting and had the other head of state say, what would we do? How would this even work? That it would be somehow hard to do. And then he says he claims to follow the law, which is a reminder that things still matter because he understands that it would antagonize the judges he needs and hopes to win over part of the time, and much of the country to admit the opposite, that they are not following the law. So you had sort of two sides of that answer there. The Supreme Court ultimately will have to decide whether to address that, the president admitting, I could do it, I'm not gonna, or whether they'll look away from this disturbing case where we all know the wrong person is stuck in a foreign prison because the Trump administration admits they erroneously sent him there. And honest Americans, including many self-identified conservatives, by the way, look at all this and oppose Trump's attacks on due process. Just like anyone based in reality doesn't want your government, which, again, remember, you pay for with your tax dollars, you don't want that government embracing fraudulent evidence against people. That's a very bad line and a slippery slope, as they say. But Trump has been spreading fraudulent evidence against that individual. For example, framing him, that would be the government terminology if you did it in court, by using false evidence that adds the gang reference MS-13 above that detainee's knuckles in a photo that's gone around. I'm not actually putting that up on the screen tonight because it's not accurate. It doesn't meet our news standards. It's fraudulent evidence. And we're also not going to reward that kind of lie. But that is the context I think you do need to probably best understand this next exchange. And reminder to what you're about to see, it's supposed to be a high bar for the president. But if any DOJ lawyer did in court what Trump basically does in this interview with false evidence, they'd be kicked out and sanctioned.
You did not have the
do that.
letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshop.
Do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it
agree
was
to disagree.
Photoshop?
That's happening inside the Oval Office about a real person who is in the wrong foreign prison by the administration's own admission. We're just 101 days in. If you're watching that and thinking, happens sometimes, or it's okay, or won't happen to you or people like you, then you haven't gotten the memo from history. That is the President of the United States, with the person they admit's in the wrong prison, referring to false evidence that frames them as a gang member. And of course, remember, you don't need Photoshop evidence if you had any good evidence. And nothing I'm saying about that false evidence resolves, of course, this individual's entire legal case. They could later be charged on real evidence for any type of crime or violence, and then we would cover that. But the Photoshop lie is disconcerting. There's also the issue of this controversy about federal officials arresting a Milwaukee judge over the obstruction, they say, of immigration agents trying to do their federal jobs because, in response to them showing up at her courthouse, she is allegedly charged with trying to help them actively evade arrest. Her lawyers have said Judge Dugan looks forward to being exonerated, and she's committed herself to the principles of due process her whole career. But the idea that we're now in a place where over what previously might have been a clash or a kind of routine state-federal conflict immediately escalated to a 10 with the feds arresting a judge tells you have a kind of chilling effect and intimidation. That judge has been suspended by the Wisconsin Supreme Court before this has been adjudicated. And even if, I want to mention, because we've touched on this case, even if you say, well, maybe there's good enough evidence that she, with the state policy, was up against the federal policy, that's a situation we've covered in a lot of states. There are sanctuary city policies that evade actively cooperating with federal immigrant targets. There's marijuana policy, depending on what state you live in. There are states where many state officials, including state judges, may be involved to some degree in allowing the trafficking of some marijuana or the use of marijuana while it is still against federal law. If you have a federal government that looks for any one of these conflicts and starts arresting people, including judges, and says, well, federal marijuana law says you can't do anything with it, it's still a Schedule I substance, you'd have a big escalation in how the feds deal with this. So yes, there is an issue there with that judge, but no, if this all sounds new and more intense, that's because the feds under both parties haven't historically dealt with it this way, including largely in Trump's first term. We also have the report now of more children being deported. A 4-year-old boy who was receiving treatment for a rare form of cancer was flown to Honduras without that medication that was needed, according to lawyers. In a Texas detention center, migrants fearing being sent to that same notorious El Salvador prison set of conflicts. They've got an SOS message you can see from the sky. Other federal employees, though, falling in with the new Trump doctrine. The Washington Post reports the Postal Service will be aiding Trump's deportation policy. An email obtained reads, "We want to play well in the sandbox," from an inspection service email summarizing a meeting with immigration officials. Now, again, the fairest, sort of broadest way to look at this is to acknowledge that there are immigration powers and immigration enforcement, and that an administration certainly can come into office saying they're going to be more stringent or try to patrol the border or reduce people coming over. Indeed, that's kind of some of the stuff that Donald Trump did talk about in the first term. What we are witnessing here is something else. A president using that issue, which at times has been a popular winner on the right, to do other things: arrest judges, flout Supreme Court orders, abrogate and collect more power, saying he needs wartime powers, even though if you checked, you might notice we have not declared a war on any of those South American or border countries. It's a lot coming at us. We have two very special guests when we're back in just 90 seconds.
This GDP number came out. It did show a drop in growth, a contraction in the economy, first that we have seen in years, in fact. And it's a sharp reversal from the 2.4% growth we saw in the fourth quarter.
But now we're at negative 0.3%.
Shrinking, reversals, negative. Those are the headlines. You saw it covered on Fox. We're joined by Jared Bernstein, who chaired the Council of Economic Advisors under Biden and worked with the Obama administration, and Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton, author of the Long View newsletter on Substack. Jared, is this bad, and was it avoidable?
Yes to both. When you see a negative handle on a GDP report, sure, that's bad. That means the economy contracted. The contraction was relatively slight, but the step down from the 2.4% in Q4, the economy or the GDP growth that Trump inherited, that's a huge step down. Moreover, there is zero question in anybody's mind who isn't paid to think otherwise that this directly links to Trump's trade war. We saw a number in this report we've never seen before. The trade balance took 5 percentage points off of GDP. Now, some other components brought it back up to where it was. But these data begin in 1947. That's how long we've been tracking it. We've never had a trade balance with such a large negative. Directly relates to the tariffs, to the trade war. And guess what? Consumers and businesses are very well informed about this. They're trying to front run these tariffs as best they can. And that led to an economic contraction in Q1.
Julian, here's Peter Navarro, who's been sort of the most hawkish trade war supporter on some of this.
This was the best negative print, as they say in the trade, for GDP I have ever seen in my life. It really should be very positive news for America.
What do you see here on the biggest topic that the administration can't just spin or argue or tell me about fine print, which is something people are feeling as we set up in our report tonight, from toy sales to rising prices?
Look, the evidence is overwhelming, and Navarro stands alone. And the problem is, usually presidents come into office and they deal with the crisis, if there is one, and they deal with it well sometimes, like many would argue FDR or Obama. Some do it poorly. This is a crisis created by the president. And so it's very hard for the administration not only to kind of craft a set of facts that contradicts what a lot of economists are saying, but also to explain it away as something that doesn't come from the administration itself. So it's a big political problem, not just for the president, but for the GOP, which also owns what's happening.
I mean, Jared, one thing you see here is people have a lived experience of these 100 days, and it's pretty negative compared to what they were promised or hoping for. And there's a tension between those results, whether Donald Trump and his aides have been bad at the job in objective measurement. Are they bringing manufacturing back? Are they lowering prices as he promised? And then there's the important but constant chaos and line pushing around him. So at the rally last night, which was the first time he's actually held one of these this term, he made a big point of going after judges and doing other controversies. Take a listen.
Judges are trying to take away the power given to the president to keep our country safe, and it's not a good thing. But I hope, for the sake of our country, that the Supreme Court is going to save this, because we have to do something. These people are just looking to destroy our country.
Jared?
Yeah. There are a lot of people who voted for Trump because he told them that he was going to lower prices, lower interest rates, and raise their living standards. He can try to shake the keys and distract folks all day long, and he's very, very good at it. Thankfully, I think folks like yourself are showing the extent to which that's breaking the law and essentially kidnapping people off of the streets. So that's not looking so great for them either. But on the economy, non-MAGA Trump voters have to be waking up every day and saying, boy, this is not what I voted for. And I think one of the things we saw in the report today, we've been getting a lot of soft data, meaning consumer surveys, businesses surveys, saying we don't like what we're seeing, our confidence is ebbing, we're not going to invest, we're going to sit on our hands. Today we saw a piece of hard data, very hard, and that negative 0.3% and a swing down from 2.4, consumer spending softer, imports again through the roof. That's hard evidence that this trade war is taking a real toll on the economy. Now, one quick point. It is not too late for them to back off. I think a lot of the damage is done. But if they were to significantly dial back the trade war, there's still enough growth in this economy that they might be able to at least stop digging. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing.
Julian, I'm going to play the president doing what he does, which is continue to normalize and launder things that are completely illegal. So saying you want to hold power past 2029 to break the Constitution um, is the ultimate admission of guilt. Indeed, it's different, I would argue, than the ethical lines. Many people said it was wrong and unethical to pardon people who savagely brutalized and attacked police. But like it or not, we have this strange, unreviewable pardon power where presidents can do that. No other president's used it like Trump, but he has that legally. As you know, as a historian who looks seriously at these issues, there's a difference between our debatable ethical things and whether we hold a constitutional democracy or not. Here's Trump on the third term last night.
So now we're going to serve 2 terms. Now they've taken that one. Cross. Right? Right, Dr. Oz? Cross that one off. Thank you.
The chants are of 3. The 3 is being held up. That is getting people to chant for the end of American democracy. In other words, 3, historically, since post-FDR, it's been a constitutionally ratified amendment, no different than chanting autocrat or dictatorship. As a historian, do you think this should be taken seriously? Do you think that there's a measure of risk to overreacting because he just can't do it and the military will only take orders from the Supreme Court sanctioned president, which wouldn't be someone trying to steal a 3rd term? Give us your historical wisdom.
No, there's no risk in overreacting. We lived through January 6th where people said, don't overreact of what might happen, and it happened. He is consistently challenging both the Constitution and the courts. You outlined a number of stories at the start of the show. One would be a problem. So many is a pattern. And I think this, too, is part of a pattern. And
so he means it. He means to do it.
I think he means it. I mean, I don't know. I can't read his mind, but he says it enough that I think we should take it seriously. And he's showing enough tension, so to speak, with the courts and with the Constitution. There's no reason to believe he would never go there.
And do you see examples in history where the person trying to break the law or break American protections is this loud? I mean, we're more accustomed to people hiding these kind of plans than previewing them 3.5 years out.
Look, the most dramatic confrontation, not quite like this, was obviously Richard Nixon saying he didn't want to give the tapes, the tape recordings. The court ultimately decided. Many people were wondering what was going to happen. Would he listen to the courts? In the end, he calmed down and he did give the tapes over. I don't think many people have the confidence that others had back in 1974. So this is unusual, and he's previewing what he's going to do. So that's why I think Congress and others should be looking at what might happen.
Well, and you remind us that was a fight over evidence with a sitting president under pressure, ultimately relenting. Donald Trump did have a fight over evidence with the DOJ and the FBI as a former president. And we already saw that dry run. He did not cooperate like Nixon. Right. We cannot prejudge that case because it never was resolved for reasons we know. So he's still legally presumed innocent in that case, but the evidence was unlike Nixon. He didn't cooperate, which is a bad sign for your note of what we should keep in mind. So I thank you, Julian Zelizer and Jared Bernstein, to both of you. Coming up, as I mentioned, Musk is in trouble. He's running up against the deadline, and he and Donald Trump are both talking about his exit as he loses billions and the conflict's pressure gets worse. Our special report next.
A radical plan to freeze government spending is on hold.
Nothing that is being done, nothing is actually making life better for the American people.
Elon Musk has been a big part of the first 100 days across the 100 days, as you probably noticed. And now we have a special report on one of the most unprecedented parts of all this. The world's richest man reportedly now moving beyond daily government work. That's the plan. I'll explain that in a moment. But he did join the cabinet meeting today in a little bit of a different posture. If you think that body language matters, and in Hollywood and Washington, it certainly often does. Back in February, he was very big, standing over, almost lording over the meeting, bravado. Today, while definitely a presence, he was seated. It seemed almost coordinated, as the president also made a point of praising Musk while hinting at his departure.
this whole room can say that very strongly. I've really been a tremendous help. You opened up a lot of eyes as to what could be done. And we just want to thank you very much. And, you're invited to stay as long as you want. And at some point, I guess he wants to get back home to his quarters.
This is not political rocket science. You can kind of see what's happening. Special acknowledgement, the applause, alluding to going, but not being pushed out. Stay as long as you want. There's actually more to that under law, which I'll explain in our report. But we have evidence that Musk is planning to get back to his day job or other business day job, so to speak. And we have evidence that is documented because there are still rules, even if you're pals with the president and a partial government employee. There are rules through the SEC and shareholder and regular updates about what the CEO is up to. Musk has told Tesla shareholders he'll spend less time on the federal government stuff and more time running the company. His personal fortune has crashed an astounding $114 billion in these 100 days. That is a ton even for someone as rich as Musk, over $1 billion a day lost. And it is related. Musk, of course, broke out his chainsaw and he got some things done in Washington trying to use what are basically quick fixes instead of the longer hard work of changing staffing plans for a multi-year budget with Congress. He went in and tried to pick off or fire the people that were easiest to do under the current rules. His fortune, of course, is based on many things, but a huge part is the only currently publicly traded company he has, Tesla. You can see the price dropping over a third. And there are a range of reasons, but even Tesla analysts and pro-market people who want Tesla to succeed have complained that partly it's that Musk has politicized himself, his brand, and his companies. The regular Americans have taken the protests against Musk's government cuts and taken them out in the streets, in the fields, into Tesla shops, calls for boycotts. But it also goes beyond that company. Americans have been clear that the idea that a part-time employee of the federal government who also insists on running his other companies, having this much power over our federal government and our staff and various programs, that people don't think that's a good idea and that they are aware of the obvious conflicts of interest.
My concern right now, and I think I speak for a lot of Americans, is Elon Musk.
Elon Musk and Doge have been authorized by the President
of the United States.
Can we count on you to go back to Washington and demand immediate oversight into Doge and Elon Musk?
These are real people looking at this real situation and with their response. And we've covered before how some things in government still work. We've seen the Supreme Court continue to do its job and enforce limits. We've seen some agencies enforce limits. We've also seen the Trump folks push and get away with a lot. But keep in mind, most members of the Trump administration and all of the cabinet, they are following the current rules. They don't think they would get away with breaking the law on that and still trying to order around federal government employees. If you insisted on running, say, the Treasury Department and Goldman Sachs and making money self-dealing, we have every reason to think a court would say no. And then all the employees at that agency would say, I'm not following your orders because the court just said you're not in charge. There are things that still work, is my point. Musk has found a temporary loophole where he doesn't have the same level of divestment, oversight, or transparency because he's a part-time employee, what's called a special government employee. It's that loophole. So you don't actually have to go as far with the ethics requirements and financial disclosures, let alone divesting your whole company, because the idea as flexibility was sometimes the government might need a certain expertise from someone who's not gonna easily step away from their whole job forever. But there's a limit. 130 days of government work a year. Under law, that's the limit. And there's evidence he's spent, and this is debatable, but Fortune says about 90 days so far doing it. And he says he wants to keep working a day or two a week. He could stretch this out and kind of keep in a relationship with the president. But the larger point is, however it seems sort of random, and now they're having the meeting, and hey, thanks a lot, they're heading towards a 130-day break. And maybe they don't like admitting at the Trump White House that they're following the rules all the time. So they're not citing that reason. But it is interesting to see they're approaching that limit. And remember, Musk could keep working after that limit if he just wanted to follow rules like everyone else. do some disclosures, join the cabinet. Only he can say, and only he might really know why he's so afraid or unwilling to do that if this public interest job was so important. Meanwhile, the Republican Speaker is blocking basic efforts that the Democrats have pushed to deal more directly with this new situation of this sweeping government employee having so many conflicts.
We have seen as Elon Musk is on his exit out of the federal government, he has secured billions of dollars in new contracts across the federal government. Conflict of interest? Yes, absolutely.
That's the Democrats using their bully pulpit to flag this. They don't have enough votes to force the floor to take it up in the House, so we're reporting on how democracy works. Republicans had a real but slim House majority, and the Dems would need to convince some Republicans to join them to get that floor action I mentioned. But this is still a big problem. I've told you there's sometimes in politics where we just get a denial that, no, it's no problem. Musk and Trump understood it was a problem, so they didn't deny that conflicts were an issue. Instead, remember, they initially made a big show of claiming there would be no business conflicts, no requests for help. It was a vow that they then very publicly broke.
I mean, I haven't asked the president for anything ever.
And if it comes up, how will you handle it?
Well,
He won't be involved.
Yeah, I'll recuse myself if it is.
If there's a conflict, he won't be involved.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want that, and he won't want it.
I love Tesla. You got to give him credit.
We want the future to look like the future. And it's kind of, what kind of truck would Blade Runner drive?
The one I like is that one. And I want that same color.
The fact check for both of them, false. Musk did not recuse from the Tesla event on the White House lawn. Maybe the stock price pressure made him rethink the limits that he claimed so loudly on Fox News and television and elsewhere, but they're literally hawking the company's product. If you saw it in a movie, you'd say that's a bit blatant. Would they really do it like a showroom? That is how Musk has been running roughshod over not only the spirit of the rules, but his own claims for himself. His companies also have contracts with many different federal agencies. And as I've told you before, some of his companies have done remarkable things. They produce value. They were under contracts before he had this relationship with the current administration. So we want factually to report on this and make sure that you're not getting ripped off. But we're not suggesting that he's never done anything of independent value. The problem is now he wants it both ways. And then also trying to slash the government and fire all these federal workers while doing business with the federal government. The savings that he said he would produce, the claims about them have also gone down.
I think we can do at least $2 trillion. I think we'll try for $2 trillion. I think that's like the best case outcome. But I do think that you kind of have to have some overage. I think if we try for $2 trillion, we've got a good shot at getting $1. We can actually find $1 trillion in savings. That would be roughly 15% of the $7 trillion budget. I'm excited to announce that we anticipate savings in FY26 from reduction of waste and fraud by $150 billion.
Those were Musk's claims. Now, let's look at an independent audit. That's what most companies rely on, especially when they're looking outside at a merger or buying something. The New York Times reports Musk's approach to government cost taxpayers over $130 billion. In other words, the bulk of what Musk has done has wiped out the claimed savings, even if you quote his current agency. And you take that together, and the numbers aren't really adding up. Not for the claimed savings for the federal government, definitely not for Mr. Musk's loss of over $100 billion. What did we just live through? And does it matter? Well, obviously, I think it matters, which is why we've done this report for you. But we have a special guest at the intersection of journalism and the Musk politics beat right after this. Donald Trump talked about Elon Musk leaving government eventually in a big meeting today. Teddy Schleifer, New York Times reporter and MSNBC contributor, joins us in all this. He covers billionaires, including Musk. Welcome. And what have we learned about the pressure on Musk and its efficacy in these 100 days?
Yeah, I mean, we learned that Elon Musk certainly did a lot. From the moment that Musk showed up at Mar-a-Lago, on election night. I mean, we broke the story. I was retelling the story to a Musk friend the other day. Like, we had no idea after November 5th that Musk would not leave. That was, he flew to Mar-a-Lago. He's going to election night. No big deal. And then, we're now, 4 or 5 months into this, 100 days into the administration. He's been the main character every single day. At times, it feels like we at the New York Times and certainly on MSNBC, we're covering the Musk administration, not the Trump administration. He's kept us entertained.
So what moved him, and how much did this 130-day limit matter? It's kind of hard to untangle. As I mentioned, he and Trump are both admittedly skilled communicators. So if the 130 days mattered in private meetings with his lawyers who said, hey, we're not disclosing anything, you got to deal with it,
Sure.
it's not like we might know.
Yeah, I mean, I can report that, during the transition, it was very important to the Musk team that he be a special government employee, which is this, description, technical definition, which basically limits Elon to 130 days in a calendar year. I will say, like, people get around that all the time. There were people in the Biden administration who were technically special government employees. The 130-day limit, there are some clever lawyers out there, Ari, who can kind of figure out a way to do it for longer. And one thing that I'm going to be interested to see over the other 230 days of 2025 is whether Musk is as involved as he's been right now, just from California or from Texas, where he's able to basically, contort the law here in a way that there's a bipartisan tradition, sadly, of doing this. And maybe Elon will be still try to remain present. I think the counter argument to that is Elon is a force of nature. The fact that he's in Washington, meeting with Scott Bessent, meeting with Marco Rubio, getting into fights with these people, you can only do that when you're there. And I think there's a lot of questions about whether Elon will be as effective.
When you go into the White House and the West Wing, you realize how small it is, the physicality of it, because it was built a long time ago in a different era. And, your newspaper also reported that one of the days that they got Trump to back down more on tariffs was by jumping into the room when Navarro was busy somewhere else, so he couldn't intervene. It's a physical thing to some degree, which is old school. The Tesla crash might be attributable to more than one thing, but it would seem that him doing a different job that was highly politicized and controversial certainly didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, the stock market's complicated, but Musk's point of view here, and this is certainly a Musk-friendly frame, is that the only reason Tesla is doing poorly is because all these mean liberals have stopped buying my cars, right? It is certainly true that.
Well, let me jump in. Let's take the adjectives out. If you're just an analyst of that, was it a drag? It may come back up. He might not like it, but the drag would suggest that kind of direct action, rather than Democrats only holding hearings, getting out and going at him might have been effective.
Yeah, I mean, as a political strategy, certainly that is possible. But I do think it is true that there's been political polarization on Elon Musk even before he went into office.
Sure.
Even before he went in there. There's a huge gender split when you look at polling on Elon, where lots of men love him. Lots of women dislike him. He's a polarizing figure, perhaps the most polarizing business leader we've seen today, and maybe even for longer. Why I find so fascinating about this, as you know, is Tesla and Musk loving used to be this liberal characteristic, and the business troubles that Tesla is encountering are almost because the brand has been flipped inside out. Where you used to have this brand that was so tied to EVs and Obama era subsidies, and now, a colleague of mine did a story about what it's like to have a Tesla in Marin County, California, right now. It's totally gone kind of off the rails.
Right, and it speaks to the limits of his power. You can have that wealth and power and government influence, but if you also want a consumer-facing product, you have to think about whether half or more of the country thinks that what you're doing is wrong in their view, and that's just reality. Teddy Schleifer, thank you for joining us as an expert on the beat. We're going to fit a quick break, and when we come back, the CBS journalist calling out censorship in this MAGA era. CBS journalists have been blowing the whistle on their parent company over censorship, and now that company is meeting with Trump's legal team about settling a lawsuit that has widely been described as probably a nuisance or frivolous, not one that they could lose. It accused 60 Minutes of basically editing an interview with Kamala Harris in a way that the Trump administration didn't like. That's not usually unlawful. The lawsuit is thus thin. Trump's claims were also debunked because CBS took an unusual step, but in a type of transparency, to release both the transcripts and raw footage of the entire interview. Of course, 60 Minutes is a taped interview show. It's not live. All their interviews are edited to some degree. Now, the New York Times reports that the parent company has a board that's outlined a financial term for settling with Trump anyway. The timing is suspicious, as CBS's own journalists have noted, because that company, Paramount, has a pending sale to a Hollywood studio. They need government approval, which is not supposed to be done on a transactional political basis, but these are the times we live in. The Times reported that the company's top shareholder wants to get this done for a major payday. Now remember, this is the controversy that 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley alluded to in a very rare, almost unprecedented on-air discussion, because the longtime chief of 60 Minutes, their top producer, had resigned in protest of this alleged political corporate censorship and meddling.
Stories we've pursued for 57 years are often controversial. Lately, the Israel-Gaza war and the Trump administration. But our parent company, Paramount, is trying to complete a merger. The Trump administration must approve it. Paramount began to supervise our content in new ways. Bill felt he lost the independence that honest journalism requires.
The whistleblowing, the allegation, was that the parent company was doing this for Trump. The reporting now is they're meeting with Trump's lawyers and discussing a, quote, financial settlement that many lawyers say in normal times they'd never have to pay.